And welcome, good evening on this rather rainy kind of autumnal evening. This is Democracy Week, and as part of that week we are launching the first in a series of Q&A events with your states members. This is the first, so tonight's Q&A event is going to be focusing on getting to know the states members that we have with us, who I'll be introducing shortly, and also to get your concerns and your questions in as well, and that's what I'd like you to do now. So if you have a question, I obviously have two states members here, and we'll have two more coming in half an hour. If you have any questions for them, please put them in the Q&A box now, and we will get on to that. But first of all, I'm going to introduce to you, we have Deputy Moz Scott, who's Deputy of St Brelade's.
Hello.
You're also Chair of the States Assembly Economic and International Affairs Panel, and you were an independent member of the Public Accounts Committee before you became a States member, who were voted in. We have Deputy Kirsten Morel, who is the Deputy for St John, St Lawrence and Trinity. You are the Minister for Economic Development, Tourism and Sport. And last States Assembly, you and culture. Sorry, I forgot your culture.
I wasn't going to correct you.
And, and last Assembly, you were also the Assistant Minister for that department as well. Right. And you are now also Deputy Chief Minister for this Assembly too. Welcome both of you, thank you for coming in. And first of all, I'm going to ask you, Moz, you're brand new to this, so has it been the sort of experience that you've had so far, been what you've been expecting?
Well, in some ways, yes, because I do have experience of dealing with the state's procedures as a result of being an independent member of the Public Accounts Committee, so that gave me some insight on how things are run. Yeah, there's an awful lot to learn, and so I knew there would be, and so have I had any surprises? Not really. Just know that there's a lot of reading to do, and I'm going to be learning even more and more as I go on.
Thank you. And Deputy Morel, you've obviously been in the States Chamber before. We have seen quite a radical change in the makeup of the States Chamber. How do you feel things have changed for you? Or have they? Have they not?
They have changed. I'm now a member of government as well, which is really exciting. A whole new world of learning as well. The Assembly is completely different, and so relationships that I built up over the last 4 years, a lot of them have disappeared because the people aren't in the States anymore, and so it's about learning new relationships with people like Moz, because whilst I didn't know Moz before, we didn't know each other closely, we had never worked together, and so there's a whole lot of getting to know people, which is part of the kind of new Assembly.
And I mean, obviously people, members of the community will have only seen you have one States Assembly so far. Yeah. However, since the June election you've been quite busy. What have you been doing since June?
From the perspective of being a member of government, we've been straight in at work. The Chief Minister had a 100-day plan, so that's touched almost all departments, so we've all been working on a 100-day plan. But also the law requires that the new government brings forward a common strategic policy, which is the account of the main policies that binds the Council of Ministers together, and which will be the kind of guiding light for the Council of Ministers over the course of the Assembly. That will be published in the next couple of weeks, and will go to the States Assembly then for approval, and then it becomes effectively the States Assembly's common strategic policy for the next 4 years. So, alongside that, we've also got to get the government plan together, which is the budget and the spending for next year, and those are the main pieces of work before that the government's been working on, that I've been working on as well. That doesn't even begin to talk about the stuff within the department. There's just, with any department, whether it's health or economic development or education, there's all sorts of stuff going on all the time, which you have to deal with. Everything from Battle of Flowers through to Battle of Britain, and then working out how best we're going to support tourism, how best we're going to support agriculture over the coming years, putting in the 1% for culture, arts and heritage. That's a piece of work I did last year, but that continues on into the next year and years ahead after that. So it's been non-stop since we got elected.
I can imagine. So if you've got questions about any of that Deputy Morel's just answered, please do put your questions into the Q&A box, which is below this video feed. Now, Deputy Scott, you've obviously joined Scrutiny, and you've already started as well, haven't you?
Yes, there's been a lot of work catching up with what the former Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny panel was looking at, because when it comes to ministerial policy, some of it's been produced, some of it's being updated, so there's a lot to actually look at in terms of what was produced. Was it even scrutinised? Some of it wasn't. And then talking to some of the agencies that actually are involved in implementing government policy as well, getting their feedback. And that's on top of things like reviewing the propositions that government already have put forward in the form of a mini budget. I brought 2 propositions and I withdrew 2 propositions, which I'm working on a bit more. And of course the constituency work, which of course Kirsten has that on top of his role as too, but yes, there's plenty of that.
And I mean, like you, around nearly half of the States Assembly are new this time around, and indeed in the Council of Ministers there's a lot of new politicians effectively going in. How do you feel about that? Do you think that they have the experience? Do you think that it's a breath of fresh air that more people are coming in? How do you view kind of the fact that we've got nearly half of our elected states members now are brand new to politics?
Well, in one way, it's refreshing. It's absolutely fantastic that we've got so a reasonably mixed bunch in terms of gender and people from a more diverse background. But experience does have its advantages. So what I've noticed is that I'm somebody who always kind of like, and this is probably to do with a former profession of mine as a lawyer, I always look at the consequences, what will happen if this happens, and how might I anticipate that, and so that very much influences the way in which I vote or even put myself forward in certain positions. And I don't know if that's always so a natural thing for some people who are new to work out. I just think sometimes they might vote in a certain way and think, oh, I didn't realise that might end up having this effect.
And Deputy Morel, you're obviously in the Council of Ministers now, so again, a lot of newbies, let's say,
Yes.
in the ministerial roles. How is that kind of working out?
So far, it's working out very well. I haven't added up the numbers exactly, but I'd say roughly half the ministers are new to the States entirely. So when I do this in my role as Deputy Chief Minister, offers them support. I'm someone to go to for help or advice if they need it, because I'm aware that particularly for those new ministers, they're not just new to government, but they're new to being States members. And as Moz said, you've got constituency work, you've got a whole world of learning, because being a States member is such a unique task that there's no way, if you haven't done it before, you have any idea what it's going to be like. And so it's about helping them through that. And so far, everyone's kind of rising to the challenge incredibly well. And the new voices in the Council of Ministers are exactly that. They're new voices, they're fresh, they're bringing new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I'm really grateful that they're there, because I think it's a change that Jersey wanted, and we're seeing that in action. And
you mentioned there about what it's like. What actually is it like being a States member? Because most people will just see the kind of public side when you're all in the States Chamber, but as you've mentioned before, both of you, there's a lots of work going on behind the scenes. So what's it actually like? What does a kind of a day in the life of Deputy Morel look like?
Yeah, a day in the life of Deputy Morel looks like I'm a slave to my timetable, if you know what I mean. It's meeting after meeting. The moment you get up, it's non-stop. I've got to admit, it's that there are phone calls, meetings at the weekend with particularly constituency. Now I'm in government, I do a lot of my constituency work at the weekends, so that takes up weekend time. Moz mentioned the reading. The amount of reading that the States member has to do is unbelievable. It's incredible, the amount of reading that we have to do, so that's always going on as well. And there's no job like it. And I know you'll be speaking to Deputy Luce, who's been a States member for many years, and I'm sure he can tell you that there's not a role like this in Jersey. Having said all that, it's an absolutely brilliant role. I really enjoy it. I enjoy the engagement with people. I enjoy, and I think all States members share this, and this is how I approach all States members, is we're all elected because we want to help people and we want to make life Jersey and better. life in Jersey better. The only thing that the only differences we have are just that we may have different thoughts on how best to achieve the improvements that we want to make. But I honestly believe all States members come to this role from a good place.
And obviously it's your second term, but what is your priority as a States member for this office? Have you got anything specific that you want to achieve by
Outside of
term?
the work in government, my main thing that I want to do is see a more cohesive assembly. I think one of the things that the last 4 years taught me, I believe, was that the newest, it's 15, 16 years old now, but the system we have with the Council of Ministers and a government and then the States Assembly, by its nature, it divides the Assembly, and I think that's just bad for Jersey. And a lot of people, understandably, say we should go back to the committee system, and a lot of people don't, think that was too slow and ponderous, and they're possibly quite right. So I think it's beholden on us to try and find a more cohesive way of working, so that we can have all 49 members of the States Assembly involved, because no one got elected to do nothing. That's the other thing. So if you are outside the government, I think it's really important that the government tries to include people to make sure that everyone feels that they're taking the island forward.
Okay. And Deputy Scott, you are outside government effectively, because you're part of Scrutiny. What's the day in the life of a Scrutiny member look like for you?
Well, there's quite a lot of exchanges going on with the scrutiny officers in terms of correspondence, arranging meetings, and I do tend to be hearing a lot of pings on my kind of computer as new stuff comes in. On top of that, there's a certain amount of work that I'm doing that's written work when I'm, say, drafting propositions and emails. There's a lot of juggling, but I'm used to that. I mean, I did do a job which did involve an awful lot of having to constantly prioritise and put my ducks in a row, as it were. I think the main difference is that strange element which reminds me of going back to school, which is in the States Assembly itself, where you're kind of in this chamber and everybody's standing up when the bailiff comes in, and it's about orderliness. I mean, there's reasons for the way that we behave, and everybody waiting in turn. But again, it's very different, I think, than to what you might see in many boardrooms in that case.
And what are your priorities? What do you want to achieve over the next 3 years?
Well, there were a number of things during my campaign that I said I would like to encourage government to consider in terms of change, and it's really to ensure that when it comes to the way in which government's managed or the way in which we interact with the electorate, that we're using 21st century models, basically. That's one thing. I'm also, along with Kirsten, I mean, we come from, as Kirsten said, a similar perspective. We both want prosperity in this island. We need it to actually fund a lot of the things that we both want to see in terms of environmental improvement. So that really is my key priority. And in order to do that, a lot of it is really just kind of being on Kirsten's back, as it was. Just kind of keep saying, hey, what are you doing here? When you do this, what do you mean by this? So that's really much of the work that I'm tasked to do.
And we're getting questions in, so please do get your questions in to Deputy Morel and Deputy Scott here. If you can only change one thing, what would it be? I don't mean in your role, but I mean in I think it's in your time of office. What the one thing that you really want to achieve, that you want to change?
In the island, I would like to see a more modern way of funding election campaigns. I think that what we have at the moment is perhaps a throwover from historical times when it very much government and parliament was about people who had money, and that shouldn't really be the thing that actually gets people elected. So whilst I can see the benefits of perhaps a system where people have to demonstrate support, it does concern me that some elements of competition in campaign all come down to just amounts donated by private donors and that sort of thing, which I don't really think government really should be about that.
And you're talking there about sort of, you know, the divide effectively. Is there anything that you feel should be done to try to get more young people involved in politics? Have you got any suggestions for that?
I think that
Or any of the minority groups who aren't necessarily represented so well?
well, again, that could be helped in terms of having more people from a diverse background prepared to stand, but also what is needed is people to actually see that government makes a difference, that too often I think there's that idea, well, and it's been around for centuries, that those people in the States Assembly are a bunch of idiots, and I can see that there are many ways in which government will run where things seem painfully slow, but then there's also a lot that often needs to be considered, and it's not always quite clear to people about the different interests that need to be taken into account, or even just, you know, kind of conventions that perhaps need to be changed that people haven't thought about. But to engage with younger people, I do think that the States Assembly's own, if you like, Civil Service Estates Gref, they put an awful lot of effort into that. We do have the youth parliament, we have school visits. I never, when I was a kid, never even dreamed that I could possibly go to the States Chamber and actually push those buttons and debate in that way. So I think a lot is going on there. So there is an element to which I think it's the more cynical adults that we need to kind of convince now.
Cynical adults, which is exactly what an event like this is all about. So if you're at home, do get your questions in, engage with your state's members. You voted them in, so let's get asking. So the one thing that you want to change, have you mentioned that already?
I haven't. Ultimately, I would like people in Jersey to have a greater sense of community and pride in their own island. I think it's too often we forget that Jersey is our own place, and it's incredible. We have our own democracy. We're 100,000 people who run ourselves. There are so few places in the world that are like that, and with that comes a sense of pride in being from Jersey and understanding that the States Assembly is there to enact the democratic will of the people of Jersey. And there are very few places in the world where people can be so close to their states members, to their elected representatives. You know, in some places there's ranks of bodyguards between them and the people who are in government. Here there's not. There's a doorbell you can knock, there's a phone you can pick up and speak to them. And so I think we have this incredible access to our democracy, but I really want people to understand and value that and have pride in it, and have pride in the island as a whole, because we are Jersey. It doesn't matter where you're from, and that's why it is so good to see different faces in the states of Jersey. But we are all here, we're all islanders, and we need to take this island forward into the 21st century. That's what I'd really like to see, is that sense of pride and understanding of we are together in this.
Okay, wonderful. And you mentioned there that obviously that we're self-governing. I'm going to move on to slightly economic topics, because you'll both have your hats in the economic ring. UK has got itself into a bit of a pickle, and the pound is at its lowest level, sterling is at its lowest level since the record began, I think, against the dollar, that is. We're obviously tied to the pound, to sterling. Is that going to have an impact on Jersey going forward?
It will. Unfortunately, the UK's self-inflicted pickle inflicts a pickle on us as well. Unfortunately, the fall in the pound and the value of the pound is going to increase inflation in Jersey. It will increase the cost of living in Jersey, because goods that we import from outside the sterling area, so to speak, which many of the goods that we have there, from Europe, they're from America, they're from China, all those goods will become more expensive in order for us to import them into Jersey. On top of that, in order to try to fight that inflation, we can strongly assume that the Bank of England will raise interest rates, probably more than they would have done just at the beginning of the week if you had asked the Bank of England governor. And as a result of that, interest rates on mortgages will rise, which means that people paying their mortgages, if they're not fixed rate mortgages, they're going to be seeing increases in the amount they're having to spend on their housing. So really sadly, and this is what frustrates me, is the UK's pickle becomes our pickle as well.
So
and
what are you going to do about it, I guess?
Well,
It's the obvious question.
what we have to do is we have to try to help islanders deal with the cost of living rises. That's something we're already doing.
Would you ever
that's the mini
consider
budget.
disconnecting from sterling?
I don't think, it's funny, I haven't ever considered disconnecting from sterling. I've thought of it the other way around, and I even asked a question of our economist today about this, which was, would there be value in having more than one currency in Jersey? The euro or the dollar. I'd probably say the euro because Europe's next door to us. But I think that's something that's worth us looking at. Not just because we're in this today. You shouldn't, one event shouldn't drive a really big long-term change like that. It's something I've been thinking of for a long time. And now that the UK has left the EU, there's a lack of stability involved there. And I think we're seeing that. There's a lack of stability in the government. That feeds through into its economy. And whereas the euro is much more likely to be stable purely because of the size of the area and the number of different countries involved. And so there could well be value in having a kind of dual currency operating. Interestingly, though, I don't think we have any foreign currency reserves as a government, which I think is quite interesting. It's perhaps also something we should be looking at.
And in Scrutiny, you must be watching this very closely.
Yes, Kirsten, or shall I be calling you?
Yeah, Kirsten's
Morel?
fine, absolutely.
Kirsten's got some real challenges, and in fact, businesses throughout the island have got challenges, and I do agree with what Kirsten has been saying. I was thinking about the sort of the investment strategy of government, and that it's been known to hedge against foreign currencies. And I was thinking, well, I wonder if it's ever thought about hedging against sterling. That actually can create perhaps some opportunities for some businesses, insofar as if you're selling goods and it's cheaper for other countries, people in other countries to buy them. But we've got lots of related issues in terms of just how supply chains work and connectivity work. COVID didn't do us any favours. It's reduced that to some extent. So to actually help Kirsten actually forge a positive way. And bearing in mind, you see, my panel isn't just looking at the work that Kirsten does. I mean, we also scrutinise the Minister for the Finance Industry. So there's two sides of this coin. And on top of that, we also have just the things that are happening in terms of the global economy generally. We find that the bigger businesses are buying up the smaller businesses. It's more economical to do so, and the smaller businesses aren't kind of able to operate so much, and particularly as costs go up and up and up. And so I think there's a lot of learning from government to do in terms of the global economy and what's working and the traps we shouldn't fall into.
Okay, thank you. And I've got some questions coming in from the audience. Thank you. I think we'll talk about this one first, because straight on the back of what we've just been talking about, what measures are being taken to ensure that small business and business owners aren't impacted by the upcoming increase in the minimum wage? Because obviously with all the whole tightening of the economic situation, that could be another kind of problem that small businesses are going to have to negotiate.
Yeah, the increase in the minimum wage will be a problem for some businesses.
But obviously essential for the people who are
absolutely.
earning the wages.
But there's been I would say there's been a kind of, I don't know if it's a change of mindset, but there's a way of thinking in Jersey now, which is that people, and this is totally understandable, people should be paid a fair wage for the work that they do, and that's understandable. And I stand by that myself, and that's where the living wage idea comes in. The minimum wage is rising because we know that there's a cost of living problem at the moment, and we know that people at the very who are paid the lowest incomes need that help. There's no question. Now, the reality is in Jersey that there are not very many businesses which pay the minimum wage. Most pay above the minimum wage. Wage inflation which we've seen in the last few months as well, has increased that. So actually, there are not many small businesses that are paying the minimum wage. The sectors that are most impacted, the biggest sector is the agriculture sector, and I'm already working with the agriculture sector to try to help them through this. There is going to be an increase in what's called the accommodation offset. That's getting quite technical now, but that will help people in the agriculture who are running agricultural businesses. The hospitality sector, there are perhaps some, and retail, there are some businesses which pay minimum wage, but they aren't very many, and there is a reality they are going to have to pay their staff a little more. I know one shop that I frequent recently has been advertising staff. You know, its lowest rate was advertising for staff, and its lowest rate was £10.55, which is above the current minimum wage, and it's above where the minimum wage will go as well. And so I think in that sense, the impact on the wider economy will be limited in terms of harming businesses. But those sectors which are harmed, so to speak, or not harmed, but will find it difficult, like agriculture sector, we really need to help.
Okay, we've got just 5 minutes left now with a talk with Deputy Morel and Deputy Moss Scott, and we'll be switching over shortly to Deputy Luce and to Connétable Labey in a moment. So first of all, we've got another question for you, which is coming is Simon's asked, what options are government considering to increase revenues? And is there a concern about these new investment areas in the UK? They're low tax areas that might potentially be starting to encroach on the finance industry here. So what other revenue ideas are you thinking of?
I would love to tell you what those revenue ideas are, but I'd have to then be publishing the government plan today, and I don't want to fall foul of the Chief Minister quite now.
Okay.
So I can't say there, but the investment areas in the UK, I don't think at the moment they're a threat, because I don't think they're aimed principally at financial services. They're aimed in different places, but it's something that we're worth keeping an eye on.
So you're not going to tell us any revenue ideas?
Not at the moment.
Okay. All right, fine. Well, we'll let you off on that one. So, I mean, just finally then, you're obviously both very busy. How can what are you doing in your constituencies, and how can people get hold of you? Because there'll be people who are wanting to talk to you about constituency, about their parish matters as well.
Well, there's lots of ways in which parishioners in St Brelard can contact me. I have 3 social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, as well as my email address, which is moscott5, because I'm not the first Scott, sorry, it's m.scott5@gov.je. As Kirsten says, it's pretty easy to actually just bump into me because it's such a small island. But I am here to listen, and I am here to learn, and I believe all States members are. And I've really enjoyed the learning I've done so far. At the moment, a lot of my work for constituents seems to be based around traffic problems, and which we're kind of I've been pursuing on their behalf. Some of the things I've been up to have included installing a cycle rack, a handrail, and a cafe for disabled people. So sometimes it's just actually those really small things that make a difference to people, and sometimes just saying, yes, I'm listening, and I'll talk to the people who might be able to make a difference does help. So please, if you have got an issue like this, do talk to your deputy or constable.
And Deputy Morel, you've got quite a few big issues to deal with, as we've just been talking about economically. How are you managing to stay connected with your parishioners?
Yeah, it's not easy. I've got to admit, that's, I'd say, the toughest thing about being in government is that there's not a great deal of support to help you with the administration of just your inbox. And my inbox has taken on a life of its own at the moment, I've got to admit. But I would still say the best way to contact me is via email. And I apologise if I haven't got back to you. Please do email again, and I'll do it. But people do also phone me up. But I do surgeries with the other 4 members of our district, and we do them monthly. And it is a case of, please do email me, please do give me a call, and we'll get back to you. But those are the main ways. And also just being in the district. I attend events, the parish events as well. And it's being there, as Moz says, you bump into people, your face is around, and that's what's really important. We've not gone anywhere just after we were elected. We've not disappeared. We're still very much here.
And I've got one more question just popped in, and we've just got enough time. What one thing would you change about the States Assembly?
Oh, I'd ask
Let's
Moz
say the
that
seats.
first. Otherwise, I
The
think the answer.
Chairs, air conditioning.
Heat, yeah, the air conditioning. That
No,
was
no,
it.
the sensible things about
Yeah.
Well, it could do a bit more light at times, actually. And sometimes it's got too much light. It's a very old building. And
What about the makeup of the states itself? Anything you'd want to change?
you mean in terms of the numbers, the actual makeup in terms of members and things?
The question.
Well, I certainly
Kate's
would
asked-
like to see senators reinstated. That's certainly what my constituents, when I door knocking, most of them were telling me that. So, yeah, I
Return
think
to
there's...
senators.
Well, yeah, but I would like to see improvements as well. I think what we want is progression, not regression. So I think that there are other things we could do to ensure that diversity is retained, even if we do bring back senators. And again, the cost of campaigning is one of those elements that I think needs to be examined.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question at this late stage? I know
very
you're
quickly.
out of time, but I was told right at the beginning I could ask a question.
Please do.
Yeah?
We're about to switch over with our deputies,
Yeah,
but
it doesn't matter to me whether I talk to these two or the other two on the bench over there, actually. But the question I wanted to ask is that, as far as I can work out, there are very, very few members of the public at this meeting tonight. Yeah? I think, I'm not sure about these other guys here, but I think literally the only member of the public here is me. Yeah?
there's people at home watching.
Sure,
Yeah.
there's plenty of stuff on the web and computers and everything, but in the real world, because you were talking earlier on about security and everything, and being approachable as people and everything, in the real world, which is what a lot of people have to live in now, especially with the pound sinking to 104 yesterday. In the real world, why do you think I am the only member of the public here tonight? Is it
Okay.
sort of engineered for no one to be able to...
No. So the question is we've got the opportunity to be a live audience here. I think we haven't got very many people in the audience, and although obviously everybody's watching at home, I think one of the reasons might potentially be the weather. Any particular answers that you two want to give?
Well, I think it's accepted there is a problem in this community with engagement in politics. I remember when I worked in the finance industry, nobody was actually even interested. Nobody even knew what was going on half the time in government. As long as you could go home, watch telly, as long as the world wasn't collapsing around you, why would you want to get engaged in all this boring stuff? And one of the it is raining tonight. Why would you want to go out in the rain and sit in the library when, even if you did want to see this, you could watch that at home? So that sort of strikes me as the things that we need, and we are still trying, and this is the whole point of this particular exercise, to just encourage people to actually follow politics locally. It does make a difference.
It really does. First of all, I think it's just unfortunate there aren't so many people here tonight, but you're right, it's a wet, rainy day. People aren't going to come out. There's definitely there's a certain cynicism in the question, if I may ask, and if I may say, and this is not us trying to hide from people. This is quite the opposite. We are trying to say we are here, and I think the State Screp are doing a really good job in trying to help us engage with people, which is what Democracy Week is all about. As far as changing anything in the States is concerned, just going back to that question, was, as Moz said, senators. I think that came across loud and clear on the doors as well, that people would like to see senators come back. And so there is a proposition coming forward about that, and I look forward to voting on that.
Fabulous. Well, I'm going to let the two of you go. So thank you
Thank
to
you.
Deputy Moz Scott and Deputy Kirsten Morel. And I'm going to, you may
Yeah, I'll
leave,
take this.
and I'm going to now ask Deputy Steve Luce and Connétable of Labey to come and join me. And while I'm doing that, don't forget that this is just part of Democracy Week. So you can go to the States Assembly, gov.je, where you can see what other events are going on, and you can also leave your feedback as well. So I'm going to just carry on straight away, and I'm going to introduce the two of you here. So, Deputy Steve Luce, first of all, you're Deputy for Grouville and St Martin, or St Martin and Grouville, as you might prefer to say.
Yes, I do point that out.
Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. You're a member of the Planning Committee, and you were also the only member of the Progress Party who was
Indeed.
elected. And to my right, I have the Connétable Labey, Connétable of Grouville. You're a Diversity Forum member. You are also a member of the Political Awareness Education Subcommittee. And you're also a member of the Scrutiny panel in Child Education and Home Affairs.
That is correct.
Okay, get your questions in now, and I'm going to ask you both first because I'm just having a look. Okay, we've got a question coming straight away, which is good. How are you ensuring that the two eastern parishes are simultaneously working together while still retaining their unique identity? Because obviously, Deputy Luce, you were a single parish deputy at one point.
Yes, that's right. Gwyn and Constable Labey, Deputy Labey, and I have got an interesting position in as much as we've both been representatives of our individual parishes for quite some time, and we've made this transition over to now representing two parishes, whereas Deputy Rose-Binet doesn't have that transition to make, and it is quite difficult to work them simultaneously. And certainly Carolyn and I, given our previous roles, I think have tended so far to continue very much in those roles, if you like, with a little bit in my situation, looking after St Martin's, spilling over a little into Grouville, and I suspect Carolyn is doing the similar thing on the other side. Working simultaneously, yes, of course, we've got issues in Gorey Village and around Gorey Harbour where we share boundaries and where we have lots of people. And, you know, parking's already been mentioned, and there are lots of pressures on parking. And when you go down to Gorey Village, it's very clear. It doesn't matter now, it's great. It doesn't matter whether it's one side of the boundary line or the other side of the parish boundary. You're representing all those people, much easier to actually get some action done. Well, I can think now, well, I don't need to worry about upsetting the Deputy Grouville anymore by going over the boundary and trying to sort things out on that side of the fence. We're all there together and doing what we can.
Okay, and Connétable, you're obviously new to the role, so you didn't sort of see how it was all working beforehand, so to speak. How are you finding your sort of first few weeks, few months of being Connétable?
I think Moz said it earlier, it's fascinating. It's a lot to learn as a new member, but I'm finding the whole process intriguing. I still find it a huge honour, actually, to be sat in the States Chamber, to be actually sat there looking at the bailiff and going, oh my goodness me, I'm in the States Chamber. That's how I feel quite a lot. And we've had some very historical events very recently. The accession of King Charles III. I was right in the front row. I can't emphasise enough how an incredible honour that was to be there, to witness something that doesn't happen that often. I mean, let's be honest, the last time it happened was 70 years ago. We've seen a governor leave. We're going to be welcoming a new governor next week. It's just a huge honour to be part of it.
And I mean, obviously we've got the brand new member and Deputy Luce. You were sorry, not
Slightly
trying
less
to have a
brand
slur
new,
on your
I think,
age.
is the best way to put it.
Yes, experienced, I think, is the expression. So you were voted in 2011, wasn't it?
I was, yes.
How do you view this current States Assembly compared to previous ones? It's obviously dramatically changed. We've mentioned before that half of the members now nearly are new.
Indeed,
Nearly half the council ministers are new. How do you feel about?
Well, it's very
Go
early
forward.
days, but it's great to see a lot of new people with the new ideas and new enthusiasm. And I think one of the things I'd like to see come out of this assembly particularly is to engage more with the public. And the gentleman here asked his question, and if I could go
Yes,
back to it, if he'd asked that question 15 or 20 years ago, I would say the public not engaging with politicians is generally because they're pretty content with life. You have to say to yourself today that public not engaging with politicians is not because they're content with life, because we have so many enormous pressures going on out there in the big bad world at the moment, that you can only then draw the conclusion that the public either don't trust politicians or they don't trust them to come up with the results, they don't trust them to make decisions. And when you look back to previous States Assembly, and maybe the one previous is the one I quote immediately, is to say, you know, nothing really happened. Decisions weren't made. I know we had COVID, it's taken 2 years out of our lives, but we really lacked some decent movement forward with proper decisions being made, and we had a lot of indecision. And I very much hope that this current government are going to get on and make some decisions because the worst thing to do is to do nothing. And I think we've had too much of that recently. And that may well be why we don't have the engagement from the public with politics.
Now, you've obviously just been out and about on the doorsteps for the June election. What were the main issues that were coming up that you were hearing time and time again?
The most consistent issue was the lack of the island-wide mandate. To be perfectly clear, every door I knocked on, people were fed up with the fact in fact, many of them had only just realised that they didn't have senators to vote for, and it was difficult. Right up to to May, we had senators standing up in the States Assembly making speeches, Senator Gorst, Senator Fondre, and all of a sudden, almost overnight, they were gone. And a lot of the people who hadn't engaged with the way that democracy was moving and the way the States Assembly makeup was going to change weren't aware that they were going to disappear. They had been there, and then one day they were there, and the next day they weren't. Yeah. And a lot of people, everybody I spoke to on the doorstep, island-wide mandate was the issue they all wanted to talk about. Then you get down into housing, education, health, mental health, massive issues there, and all need to be addressed. But if you want a consistent answer on the doorstep, senators.
Now, Connétable Labey, you're obviously more focused on your parish, although you are in the States Assembly, so you are voting on island-wide issues.
Indeed.
What were the issues that were coming up most for you?
I agree with Deputy Luce. I think the three top topics of the summer was the hospital, where we're going with that, what we intend to do with that. And again, I completely concur with Deputy Luce. It's about indecision in that respect. The senators, the loss of the senators, they felt disenfranchised, if I was honest. They've lost, basically they had 4 of us to vote for, or 4 of us to tick on a sheet, whereas before they had maybe 12. And they feel that they've lost that now. They've lost those extra votes. They don't feel as engaged, as this gentleman quite rightly said. They don't feel as engaged because they've lost part of their what they feel is their right. And the other one that I had a great deal on the doorstep, and I'm sure Deputy Luce will back me up here, is speeding, traffic and parking. They're huge issues. Even in the rural environment, there's so many roads around the parishes which are still being used as rat runs and speed tracks.
Now, one thing, obviously, with reform jerseys, obviously, got the largest political party. They've got a lot of St Helier candidates in there. Is the divide between town and country getting bigger? You're both from country parishes. How are we going to connect town and country? Because that's another issue, isn't it, with people being disenfranchised?
I think that having spent quite a lot of time listening to the Reform Party, I think they're a very switched-on party. There's some very bright and motivated people in that party, and I enjoy listening to their points of view. In fact, I voted with them on very recently and on many occasions because they genuinely care about their environment, they care about their parishioners, and I'm inspired by them in many cases. Deputy Mezek is an incredibly erudite young man and incredibly intelligent, and it's wonderful to watch him perform, if you like. So yes, I'm totally engaged with that party, and I will consider everything that they bring forward. That's just me personally, obviously. I know the question doesn't relate to that. It relates to how we're going to bridge that gap. But I think as an assembly, I think we could all do a great deal to bridge that gap by listening to what they have to say and engaging with them.
And Deputy Luce, do you think there is a divide between town and country?
I'm not so sure about the town and country, but I take the question, and I might put it this way. I think there's a huge divide now, much larger than I've seen before, between the rich and the poor. And I think we possibly have as big a divide between rich and poor that we've had for maybe 100 years, which is saying something. And if this government's going to make some decisions, I very much hope they're going to come out with ways to address that. And that doesn't necessarily mean giving tax cuts to the very rich, as we've seen in the UK in this last week, but I'd like to see them concentrating very much on those people with less money to make sure that they can find better ways to spend the little money that they have, because we all know the cost of living is going to continue to increase. We know housing is a huge pressure, and education is another big issue, and we've got to address all those issues. It's not going to be straightforward, it's not going to be easy. I don't know whether government are going to find the money to do that, but they have to, because if we're going to solve any of these big issues that we've got coming down the line in Jersey at the moment, we've got to address housing and we've got to address education, and that's quite different from what I would have been saying 10 years ago, because I've always been a politician who concentrated very heavily on the environment and on the economy particularly, but I now very clearly think that if you don't educate your children properly, you can't feed the economy, which needs people who are well educated to do the jobs. But on top of that, we've got to find ways of retaining people on this island, not just people who are homegrown, but people who have come here 5 years ago or 10 years ago, because they're being driven away by the massive cost of trying to be able to afford either to buy or to rent. And if we can't address that, we are going to be in big trouble.
And how can we stop young people from leaving? And should we stop all our young people from leaving anyway? That's another question. Short of building all over your green fields, how are we going to be able to do that?
Well, here's the conundrum, and I've always thought the housing was a very clear problem to solve in as much as it's supply and demand. And my answer would always be to increase supply. Now, like Kirsten, who was last session a member of the Planning Committee, I'm also now Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee. It's very clear in my mind that we've got to build more accommodation for people. And if we don't want to build in green fields, and we've used the sites that we have available in the built-up area to best effect, we're going to have to go up. Unless we want to reclaim more land, I don't particularly want to do that. But many people will have their own view on where you want to house these people, but it's quite clear in my mind that we can go up, and we can at the same time create green amenity space in St Helier, or in these areas where we build a bit higher, so that the people who live there have got the space to enjoy the open air, the grass, the green, the walking routes, the cycle routes. So there are ways to do it. But we cannot continue to see people leaving this island because they can't afford to stay here, and housing is the big reason why they can't afford to stay.
Okay, and Connétable Labey, obviously that's an issue for you. You're not going to want, you've got a heavy farming community, you're not going to want all your green fields being built on?
You say we have a heavy farming industry, but one of my parishioners told me that before the Second World War, there were 72 farms in the parish of Grouville. I'm horrified to tell you, Gwyn, there's only one left. So heavy, they're very dedicated, and I'll protect them as much as I can in years to come, because we're really going to struggle if we don't look after our farmers, especially with our food security. But when it comes to, I agree with Deputy Luce. I think the topic of housing became almost quite distressful on the doorstep in June. I met many people who had young children in the house who'd come back from university, and of course they don't all come back from university, we know that, but they were there and they wanted to be part of our Jersey society, but they simply couldn't, because there was nowhere for them to live that they could afford. And you're absolutely right. I think that the island has got a lot of tough decisions to make. I stood for politics because I believe very strongly, the very reason I stood was because I want to protect the rural environment. I want our environment still to be enjoyed for generations to come. And if we become a totally urbanized island, I don't honestly see a place for me here. I'd rather not be here if I've got nowhere to walk, nowhere to cycle. The environment for me is key in the life that we hope to look forward to in years to come, and now the future generations too. But Deputy Luce is right. We've got to find a solution to this, and I agree with him that we need to start thinking about going up as opposed to out.
Sky-rise blocks.
We all know that can cause issues of its own. But
We've had complaints about the hospital being too high already, haven't we?
Yes,
So
but I think if we looked at the North of Town Master Plan, for example, Gwyn, and you look at the area of, and I'm not saying this is where we do it, but look at the area of Springfield, St Mark's Road, the northeast of St Helier, you will find that's predominantly 2.5 stories high. And you think of the number of people who live there, and think if you took it to 3.5 stories, on average, and I know there's a lot of listed buildings, there's other things, that's going higher. It's not going 7, 8, 10, 15, 20, like people, you mentioned, let's go up. People have this vision immediately of enormous tower
But
blowers.
then don't you increase the problem that you both mentioned you have, which is the parking and the traffic, because that's what St Helier.
Yes, but we hope
person
that in
will
the
say.
future the vast majority of people who live in St Helier will work in St Helier and will shop in St Helier. They'll do most things in St Helier, and they can walk or cycle very easily. And if public transport can be improved and increased further, and let's hope that this new bus company can do some of that. When people want to go to St Billard's, or they want to go to the 5 Mile Road or to the North Coast, they'll have an option of a public transport system which is cheap and frequent.
Okay, thank you. And don't forget, you can get your questions in at home to the Deputy and the Connétable. And one of the ones that came in earlier was if you could change one thing in your time in office, what would it be? I'll go to you first, Deputy Luce.
Change one thing. I have to say I'm not a great fan of social media. I engaged with it heavily some years ago, and if you're not careful it can take over your life and you spend hours and hours every day coping with it. So I've tended to take that down a bit now, and I'd like people to just be a bit kinder, especially when the way they use social media. As politicians you've got to have pretty thick skin. I get called some names, I get accused of all sorts of illegal things. A lot of people won't be able to cope with that in real life, not necessarily politics, but out there in the big bad world, people are quite happy as a keyboard warrior to have a go at others. And if we could get people to just be a bit kinder to each other and talk to each other a bit more, instead of trying to engage with each other via the keyboard, I think maybe we get a lot more done. So
And
discussion and conversation is a way
as the
forward.
gentleman said, more people to actually come and sit in and talk to you face to face.
Great, yeah, I've got another question actually.
Okay,
If
go.
that's okay.
Yep.
My name has been mentioned. I read the papers quite a bit, thank goodness, because they're available for free here at the library. The Financial Times is anyway. And I just wondered, you obviously you've rebranded yourselves as the government recently rather than the states. It's all over the place. You're written up and thought of as the government of Jersey, not the local government or anything. I didn't know all the other countries, the big economic powers around the world these days, they have central banks that seem to be printing money to get out of trouble.
Well, we're obviously linked to sterling, so I'm not sure that's an issue that
Okay, what do
either of you
think
two
about-
can do.
When will you create your own central bank here so you can print money to get out of trouble?
Well, I don't think that's something that we could do because obviously, as Gwyn has said, we're linked to the pound sterling. But one
Sorry,
thing we
just so people at home, I'm not sure if everyone heard the question. Just would we create a central bank in Jersey so we could just print money as sterling and the dollar does? Although arguably that's not
Yeah, that's
always
it.
the best way out of things, is it?
But not necessarily. But I'll come back to the question because I wouldn't necessarily focus on printing money. But you could certainly have a Jersey bank which held securities in Jersey, which local people could go to and maybe receive much better service, much better terms, much better deals if they spent and retained that money locally. So certainly the idea of a Jersey bank is something which could, and I know has been looked at in the past, and it could work, a Jersey Savings Bank. And like when I was growing up, we had the Trustee Savings Bank, and we all used to go in on a Saturday morning and drop our coins in a little piggy bank. But that worked very well for many years, and maybe a revamp of the old Trustee Savings Bank, a Jersey Savings Bank, could be very beneficial to the island.
Might even have some branches that are open to public
Yes.
members. So that's something that that could be looked into going forward. I mean, obviously the economic situation is critical. There are a lot of people on the island at the moment who are really struggling with the rising cost of living. Are you seeing people coming to you in the parish?
We are. I know generally the perception of the rural Jersey is people who are slightly better off, shall we say? Shall we argumentatively say? But yes, we have. We've had issues about youngsters going to colleges, teenagers going to universities, single parents who aren't able to support their children. We've got some trust funds that we're trying to amalgamate into something workable that we can help these people with. There are issues coming forward, but I believe that I'm afraid we're going to be heading into some very uncertain times. And I think that our advisors, our financial advisors, the FPP, have said it to us that we've got to be looking at creating reserves. And I think this gentleman's point is very good, that I think with our strategic reserve that we currently have, why shouldn't we be setting up our own bank? And I think that has a great deal of merit. But yes, I think uncertain times is certainly what we're going to be experiencing. I think the sterling may bounce back. I'm quite convinced that that will happen. But you know, we are the slaves of so many other countries and what they do. And that's the great shame. So perhaps a local bank, a Jersey bank, might be the answer to actually shield us from these things.
Bold decision making then? What else can be done?
Well, it's difficult because many of these influences which are affecting the cost of living at the moment are completely outside of our control. We know, for example, when it comes to farming, the diesel prices have gone through the roof. Fertiliser is difficult to find, and if you can, it's twice or three times what you paid last year. We know that that links to the cost of food, and we know that's going up. We know that housing's going up. One thing we are very fortunate, if that's the right word, in Jersey, is that we haven't had to experience the massive increase in the cost of electricity which others in the UK have had to do recently. And I think we have about 12 months up our sleeve before we see those increases. And so let's hope this government can actually use those 12 months to best effect, so that when we do get to the end of 23 and we know that the deal that Jersey Electricity may have done with EDF or whoever comes to an end, and there will be quite possibly an increase in the cost of electricity, we're in a position to cope with that. Because speaking to people in the UK in the last couple of months, like I have been doing, they're all really terrified because they're seeing the price go up. Yes, the government in the UK have committed to a price cap, but those people are still going to have to pay, even with the price cap, significantly more than they did last year.
Yeah.
Businesses are closing down because even with the price cap, even with the guarantees they're given, they can't afford to pay that little extra. So let's hope we can use the next 12 months to best effect, so that when those prices in electricity do come, we're well placed, because we're heading for an electricity life, if you like, electrical houses. We're trying to phase out oil and gas because of the carbon emissions and the climate change, which is quite right. But in heading for electricity life, this massive increase that we could have, we need to make sure we are prepared for that and do what we can to keep it under control.
And we're running low on time now, believe it or not. So I was going to very quickly say to you, what about doing a bit more business with France? You can see France very clearly from the shores of Grouville.
And St Martin's as well, and
Yep.
I look at France every day and think exactly like you say, Gwyn. I was an oyster farmer for many years and sold all my produce pretty much into France.
Yep.
It's a great shame. I'm very sad that we find ourselves in the situation we are. Brexit made life a lot more difficult for us in that regard. And if there's another thing that we can do in the next few years, it's let's get back to the relations with our Norman and our Breton neighbours and try to get back to a sensible situation like we had before Brexit started.
Will you be doing anything as a Connétable of Grouville? You'll be
Well-
waving across the waters and inviting them over?
We are twinned, and I'm sure the parish of St Martin's is twinned. We're twinned with Port By. Very sadly, I was supposed to be going to a celebration 2 days after our dear Queen died, and I wasn't able to go. I didn't feel it appropriate to go and celebrate anything at that time. But yes, we have a very close link. I agree totally. I mean, 95 to 98% of all the fish that's caught around our coast is landed in France. Sadly, we don't actually eat a lot of fish as a nation, and I agree with Deputy Luce that, you know, we need those links. And the other thing is that they're currently struggling with the identity card issue, with the passport issue. Very few. I mean, for example, school children used to come over, you know, to visit us, and they're struggling with this issue. And I think we should go back to allowing our identity cards to get that back up and running, so that we can allow our tourists back over, the French day visitors. And we've also got other issues as well with regards to. Sorry.
The problem with that is the British border, though, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Brexit.
And the other thing we've got an issue with is the timing of the ferries. They're very awkward for day trippers, and I think that needs to be addressed too.
Okay. Briefly, how can people get hold of you? Can they just walk into the parish hall and speak to you?
Yes, this is where I have a great, I guess, an advantage, is the fact that we have a parish facility. I'm trying to open that up for our deputies as well, where we can have a safe place for them to meet their members of the public. But yes, I'm available most of the time, and of course I have staff too that can respond and then pass on the message to me. But yes, m.labey@gov.je. I'm unique. I'm the only one, so I don't have to put a number after it.
Although we're not the only Labey, that's
Well,
for sure.
no.
And Deputy Luce, because obviously you have your Grouville counterpart as well, but whether it's a parishioner in Grouville or St Martin, how can I get hold of
Yeah,
you?
well, s.luce@gov.je is my state's email address, my mobile number and my phone number in the book, and a lot of people know how to get hold of me and where I live.
Okay, that's really, always good. Well, thank you very much to Deputy Steve Luce and Connétable Mark Labey, and of course to our earlier guests who were Deputy Moz Scott and Deputy Kirsten Morel. Please, there are lots of ways for you to engage with your state's members, and this is the whole point of this event and of Democracy Week, of course. You can talk to members at their surgeries, as these
Yeah.
people have said. You can email them, and their emails are online. You can get those easily. And you can share your views as well in response to the current scrutiny reviews. They're always asking for members of the public to share their views and to feedback. Phone or email, do that, sort it out. You can start or you can sign a petition. So if you have a particular issue that you think needs to be dealt with, you can start a petition, and once it gets to a certain number, they have to debate that in the States. And of course, voting, that is a critical thing. That in 2026 you can vote everybody out and vote everybody back in again. It's all up to you, but all the details are on the States Assembly website, so please do go there. And thank you very much for joining us. Thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Fine, great.